Hey guys, tonight we are diving head first into a world that is both strangely familiar and deeply alien. We are going to experience what it was like to be a child in the Victorian era. Forget everything you know about attachment parenting, positive reinforcement, and screen time. We are traveling back to a time when children were expected to be seen and most definitely not heard. A time of rigid rules, emotional distance, and some truly bizarre parenting advice that would get any modern parent a swift visit from social services. And trust me, based on their standards, you probably wouldn't have made it through the first day with a passing grade. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I would love to know where you are all tuning in from tonight and what time it is in your city. Drop a comment below and let me know. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first sensation is confusion. A sudden, shocking brightness after an eternity of warm darkness. The air is cool on your skin, and the sounds are a muffled cacophony. You do the only thing you know how to do. You cry. It's a raw, powerful wail, the announcement of your arrival. But the response isn't what you might expect. There are no joyful tears from a beaming mother, no proud father rushing to cut the umbilical cord. Instead, your cries are met with a calm, professional efficiency. You are in a grand bedroom, but it feels less like a home and more like a temporary medical theater. The air is thick with the competing smells of lavender water and the sharp, clean scent of carbolic acid, a recent innovation in antiseptic practice. Heavy velvet curtains are drawn, plunging the room into a perpetual twilight, meant to soothe the recovering mother. And your mother, she is there, a pale, exhausted figure lying back against a mountain of starched white pillows. She has done her duty. The dynastic succession, or at least the addition to the family, is secure. Now her job is to rest. This period, known as the lying in, could last for a month or even longer. Your mother is confined to this room, sometimes to her bed, seeing only a few select female relatives and the doctor. It's a prescribed period of recovery, but it also establishes the first, most crucial distance between you and her. She won't be the one changing you, feeding you, or walking the floors with you at 3. That is not her rule. So whose hands are those that lift you, weigh you, and wrap you tightly in layers of linen and flannel? They are not your mother's. They are the firm, capable hands of the monthly nurse. She is a temporary specialist, hired for the first month of your life to manage you and your mother. She is your first boss, and she runs a tight ship. Your schedule is her law. Your cries are not seen as a call for comfort, but as a symptom to be managed. Are you hungry? Are you wet? Do you have wind? Affection is not in her job description. Her goal is to deliver a quiet, healthy baby to the permanent nursery staff at the end of her contract. Your father might make a brief, formal appearance. He is a tall, imposing figure, a stranger who smells of wool, leather, and perhaps faint cigar smoke. He might peer down at you in your bassinet, a flicker of pride or perhaps mild disappointment if you weren't the desired gender. He may comment on your resemblance to a distant great uncle or praise your healthy-looking lungs. Then, with a nod to the nurse and a quiet word to his recuperating wife, he retreats to his own world, the world of business, politics, and the club. The nursery, for now, is not his domain. This emotional gulf isn't accidental. It's structural, and it's underpinned by some very peculiar beliefs. One of the stranger anxieties of the time was the concept of maternal impression. It was a widely held belief that a pregnant woman's experiences, thoughts, and especially her rights, could physically mark her unborn child. If she were startled by a dog, you might be born with a dog-shaped birthmark. If she craves strawberries, you might have a strawberry mark. This put immense pressure on women to remain serene and avoid any unpleasantness, further isolating them and turning pregnancy into a state of careful, passionate management. In a way, the emotional distance was prescribed before you even took your first breath. Historians are still debating the true nature of the Victorian parent-child bond. Was this apparent coldness a cultural performance, the proper way for the upper and middle classes to behave? Or was it a grimly practical emotional defense? Infant mortality was heartbreaking because a simple fever, a bout of diarrhea, a common cold could snatch a life away with terrifying speed. Perhaps, some scholars argue, getting too attached too quickly was an invitation for unbearable grief. By entrusting your care to professionals, parents could love you from a safe, manageable distance. It's a bleak thought, but one that might hold a kernel of truth. For now, though, you know none of this. You are simply a bundle of new life in a dim, quiet room. Your world is the scent of milk and soap, the scratch of flannel, and the rustle of a nurse's starched apron. Your family exists, but as distant figures, orbiting your small universe without ever truly entering it. Your life has begun not with a tender family embrace, but with a professional handover. And the most important person in your life is about to arrive, your nanny. The handover from the monthly nurse to your permanent nanny is less of a tender welcome and more of a transfer of assets. Your new ruler arrives, often a woman in her 30s or 40s, with a face that seems permanently set in an expression of mild disapproval. She is dressed in a uniform of stark, practical black or gray, her clothes stiff with starch, rustling with every efficient movement. There is no warm cooing, no gentle smile. She assesses you with a professional eye, checking your weight, your skin, the clarity of your eyes. You have just been promoted from a temporary project to a long-term management responsibility. She whisks you away to your new kingdom, the nursery. This is not the sunny, brightly colored room full of soft toys you might imagine. In a grand Victorian house, the nursery is almost always at the very top, up several flights of stairs. It's a self-contained universe, physically and emotionally distant from the adult world below. It might consist of a day nursery, where you will spend your waking hours, and a night nursery for sleeping, often shared with the nanny herself. The air here has a different quality, a mix of coal smoke from the small fireplace, the ever-present scent of carbolic soap, and boiled milk. The windows are high, perhaps even barred, a safety measure that adds to the feeling of a comfortable prison. Your life is now governed by the clock. The nanny's routine is absolute and unyielding. You are woken at the same time every morning, regardless of how you slept. You are washed in cold or in water, a practice believed to be fortifying and to build character. You are fed at precise intervals, not when you signal hunger. Your naps are scheduled, and you are expected to take them, whether you feel tired or not. This rigid structure is the core of your early upbringing. Its purpose is not to respond to your needs, but to instill discipline and order from the moment you are capable of perceiving it. Your body and its urges must be brought under control. The nanny's authority in this realm is absolute. Your parents, especially your father, might not set foot in the nursery for days or even weeks at a time. Your mother may make a scheduled daily visit, a formal appointment to see your offspring. She might appear after breakfast, beautifully dressed, to inspect you for a few minutes, ask the nanny about your progress, and bestow a quick, dry kiss on your forehead before retreating to her own busy schedule of social calls and household management. If you were to cry or fuss during this brief audience, it would be a mark against the nanny, a sign that she wasn't managing her domain properly. Consequently, the nanny's primary goal is to present a clean, quiet, and well-behaved child to her employers. To achieve this, she has a toolkit of methods, and this is where things get a little murky. A fussy baby, a teething toddler, a child who won't sleep. These were problems to be solved. And one of the most popular solutions came in a little bottle. Soothing syrups, like the infamous Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup or Godfrey's cordial, were the nanny's secret weapon. Marketed directly to mothers and nurses, these concoctions promised to relieve pain and ensure a peaceful night's sleep for everyone. Their key ingredients: alcohol, and more often than not, a significant dose of opiates like morphine or laudanum. A spoonful of this medicine could quiet a fractious infant for hours. It's a chilling thought. You might be dosed into a stupor simply for the sake of a quiet nursery, a practice that was not only common but widely advertised and accepted. The true nature of the nanny-child relationship is a subject that still fascinates historians. Were these women all stern, resentful tyrants, doling out discipline and opiate-laced syrups? The stereotype of the cruel nanny certainly exists, and for good reason. Many were overworked, underpaid, and isolated, taking out their frustrations on the children in their care. Yet, there is also plenty of evidence, found in diaries and letters, of deep and lasting bonds of affection. For many children, the nanny was their primary caregiver and their main source of comfort and love, however sparingly it might have been shown. She was the one who was there for the scraped knees, the night fears, the small triumphs. She might have been strict, but she was also a constant, predictable presence in a world where your parents were often little more than glamorous, distant strangers. The reality is that the nanny was in a complicated position, part employee, part disciplinarian, and, in many cases, part surrogate mother. For now, your nanny is the center of your universe. Her hands are the ones that feed and change you. Her voice is the one that shushes you to sleep. It is her face you see when you wake and her shadow that falls over your cot at night. She is the gatekeeper to your parents, the enforcer of rules, and the arbiter of your daily existence. She controls everything. Well, almost everything. The one thing she doesn't control, however, is the very source of your food, and that comes from another stranger entirely. Just as your emotional nourishment is outsourced to a nanny, your physical nourishment is likely subcontracted as well. In the world of the Victorian upper and middle classes, breastfeeding your own child was often seen as, well, inconvenient at best, and a bit animalistic at worst. For a woman of society, it was physically demanding, tied her to the nursery, and interfered with the demanding schedule of social engagements that was her primary duty. Furthermore, it could ruin the fashionable shape of her figure. And so, the era saw the rise of a booming, highly organized, and deeply class-stratified industry, the wet nursing trade. So the person who provides your milk is not your mother. She is a wet nurse, a woman hired specifically for this purpose. She arrives at the house much like any other domestic servant, but her role is uniquely intimate and fraught with anxiety. Her own baby, often just a few weeks or months old, has been left behind, either with relatives in her home village or, more tragically, in the care of a baby farmer, a grim arrangement with a notoriously high mortality rate. Her body now belongs to her employer's family. Her milk is for you. The selection process for a wet nurse was meticulous and deeply invasive, based on a mixture of genuine health concerns and pure pseudoscience. Your parents, or more likely the family doctor, would inspect her thoroughly. They do check her teeth, her gums, and her skin for any sign of disease, particularly syphilis, which was a terrifying and widespread scourge. But the inspection went further. They would assess the quality of her character based on her appearance. Was she placid and good-tempered? It was believed that a nurse's temperament could be transmitted through her milk. An angry or excitable nurse might give you colic or make you fussy. Even her physical features were scrutinized. Redheads were often considered suspect, believed to have hot-tempered milk. The ideal wet nurse was typically a rosy-cheeked, sturdy country girl, seen as more wholesome and robust than her skitty counterparts. Her diet would be strictly controlled by your family. She was to eat plain, nourishing food, lots of beef, bread, and stout, to ensure the highest quality of milk for you. She was a prize commodity, a walking, breathing dairy supply, and she was treated as such. You, as a baby, would likely thrive on this arrangement. You have a dedicated source of nutrition, available on a schedule dictated by your nanny. But this entire system created a strange and complex web of relationships in the household. The wet nurse lived in the nursery with you and the nanny. This often led to tension. The nanny was the head of the nursery, the manager. The wet nurse, though technically subordinate, held a position of unique biological importance. The nanny was responsible for your discipline and routine, while the wet nurse was responsible for your very sustenance. Clashes were common. Then there was the deeply unsettling reality of the wet nurse's own child. Her maternal feelings, her grief, her worry, all had to be suppressed. She was paid to nurture you while her own baby was far away, a tragic irony that was the unspoken foundation of this whole system. Historians still debate the emotional toll this took. Some accounts suggest these women became deeply attached to the babies they nursed, pouring their displaced maternal affection onto their charges. Others paint a picture of profound sadness and exploitation, of women forced by poverty into an impossible choice. And what about the alternatives? If a wet nurse was too expensive or undesirable, you might be dry-fed. This meant being fed by hand, and it was a dangerous business. The primary alternative to breast milk was pap, a concoction of bread or flour soaked in water or milk, sometimes sweetened with sugar. This mixture was often nutritionally deficient and, far more dangerously, a breeding ground for bacteria. It was typically fed to you from a bizarre-looking feeding bottle. These early bottles were made of earthenware or glass, with a long, flexible tube and a teat made of anything from leather to ivory or preserved calf teat. They were, to put it mildly, a sanitation nightmare. The complex shapes and narrow tubes were impossible to clean properly, making them perfect incubators for deadly germs. In an age before germ theory was widely understood, a feeding bottle could be a death sentence, leading to catastrophic rates of diarrhea and dehydration, a condition grimly known as watery gripes. So your survival in these first few months hinges on a series of calculated decisions made by others. The choice between a mother's breast, a stranger's milk, or a contaminated bottle is a stark one. In your case, you are one of the fortunate ones. You are being fed by a carefully selected, healthy young woman whose own child is a ghost in the background of your well-fed existence. You are blissfully unaware of the class dynamics, the medical anxieties, and the personal tragedies that swirl around your simple, primal need for food. You just know that when you are hungry, you are fed. And for now, that is enough. For the first few years of your life, your identity is surprisingly fluid, at least in a sartorial sense. You are not yet a boy or a girl in the way the Victorians would come to define it with clothing. Instead, you are an infant. And infants, regardless of gender, were dressed almost identically. Your primary garment is a long, white, cotton or linen dress. This isn't a fashion statement. It's pure practicality. It's simple to make, easy to wash, and, most importantly, makes the endless task of changing diapers, or nappies, as they were called, much more straightforward. There's no fumbling with tiny trousers or leggings. Just a quick lift of the hem. These white dresses are a symbol of your current status. White signifies innocence and purity, a blank slate yet to be written upon. It also had a practical advantage. It could be bleached. In an era obsessed with cleanliness and hygiene, at least in theory, being able to boil and bleach a baby's clothes to remove stains was a significant bonus. So you spend your days as a little white blob, crawling or toddling around the nursery floor. If someone were to peek into the nursery, they wouldn't be able to tell if you were a little master or a little miss just by looking at you. This period of gender-neutral dressing could last until you were 4, 5, or even 6 years old. Beneath the white dress, you are swaddled in layers. The Victorians had a deep-seated fear of cold. They believed that a chill could lead to any number of ailments, from a simple cold to a fatal fever. So you are bundled up. You wear a flannel belly band or binder wrapped tightly around your torso, meant to support your back and protect your vital organs. You have a long-sleeved undershirt, or chemise. Over that, multiple petticoats to ensure you stay warm. On your head, you almost always wear a little cap, even indoors. You are a small, heavily insulated package. This fear of cold also led to one of the period's more peculiar and now discredited practices, the hardening theory. While bundling you up was common, a competing school of thought, popular among progressive thinkers and doctors, advocated for hardening infants to make them more resilient. This meant subjecting you to regimens of cold baths, sleeping in cold rooms with open windows, even in winter, and wearing lighter clothing than was typical. The idea was to build up your constitution and inure you to the cold, thus protecting you from future illness. It was a high-stakes gamble. For every robust child who supposedly benefited, countless others likely succumbed to pneumonia or other respiratory illnesses. Historians are still sifting through medical records and diaries to understand just how widespread this practice was and whether it was seen as sensible or reckless by the majority of parents. It represents a classic Victorian conflict, the desire to control nature and build a stronger human being, set against the very real dangers of their environment. As you begin to crawl and then toddle, your simple white dress might be supplemented with a pudding cap. This isn't a cap for keeping your head warm, but a padded, sausage-shaped helmet designed to protect your skull from the inevitable bumps and tumbles of learning to walk. It looks slightly ridiculous, like a miniature life ring worn on your head, but it was a common and sensible piece of baby equipment. Slowly, as you approach the age of reason, around 4 or 5, the first hints of gender differentiation begin to appear. For a boy, the transition might be marked by small changes first. Perhaps your hair, which had been kept long, is finally cut short. The lace on your dresses might become less elaborate. For a girl, the frills and ribbons might increase. The true milestone, however, is a momentous day known as breeching. This is the day a boy finally sheds his dresses and is put into his first pair of trousers, or breeches. It was a hugely significant rite of passage, marking his official transition from the female-dominated world of the nursery to the masculine world. He was no longer a baby. He was a boy. But that is still in your future. For now, you are a creature of white linen and flannel, a neutral being in a world that will soon be governed by the strictest of gender codes. You are being shaped, managed, and protected, your little body encased in layers meant to shield you from both physical harm and moral corruption. Your clothes are simple, but the theories behind them are not. Every layer, every choice of fabric, is freighted with the anxieties and aspirations of the age. You are a symbol of purity, a project of fortification, and for now, blissfully unaware of the complex identity that is slowly being tailored for you. From the moment you can make a sound, you learn that your voice has consequences, and not always the ones you intend. Your cries, your giggles, your frustrated screams are not seen as natural expressions of your inner world. They are data points, symptoms to be analyzed and, in most cases, corrected. The Victorian nursery was a laboratory for the cultivation of self-control, and emotional expression was the first variable that needed to be brought firmly into line. The prevailing wisdom, passed down through parenting manuals and the stern pronouncements of nannies, was that crying was, at best, a bad habit and, at worst, a form of moral failing. Allowing a baby to cry it out was just a strategy for a peaceful night. It was a foundational lesson in discipline. If you cried and were immediately picked up, you were being taught that you could manipulate the adults around you. You were learning willfulness and defiance. Therefore, your cries were often met with strategic, deliberate neglect. Your nanny would check the essentials. Are you wet? Are you hungry? Is a pin sticking into you? And if none of those were the issue, you would be left alone to exhaust yourself. This was your first, unspoken lesson. Your distress does not command the world. This belief system was propped up by some rather creative, and frankly bizarre, pseudo-medical justifications. One of the most common warnings was that excessive crying could lead to physical disfigurement. You might be told that crying would give you a hernia, damage your lungs, or even, and this was a surprisingly prevalent fear, cause you to go blind. A popular 19th century child care guide solemnly warns that a fit of screaming could end in convulsions. Another peculiar theory was that intense emotional outbursts, particularly in infancy, could permanently mar a child's features, leading to an unattractive face in adulthood. A furrowed brow from crying could supposedly become a permanent wrinkle. The pouting lip could become a lifelong sneer. In a society where a woman's beauty was a key asset and a man's handsome countenance was a sign of good character, the threat of becoming ugly was a powerful deterrent. So, you learn to be quiet. You learn that a placid, smiling baby is a good baby. Positive reinforcement is given for silence and serenity. The tantrum, on the other hand, is met with a swift and decisive response. You might be isolated in a room by yourself, a precursor to the modern timeout. You might have your hands tied to prevent you from thrashing or hitting. Or you might be subjected to a splash of cold water to the face to shock you out of your hysteria. The goal was to extinguish the fire of passion before it could grow. Laughter, too, was suspect. While a gentle, demure smile was acceptable. Loud, boisterous laughter was considered unseemly and a sign of poor breeding, especially for girls. It lacked decorum. A child who laughed too loudly was in danger of growing into a coarse and vulgar adult. Your joy, like your sorrow, was meant to be contained, moderated, and displayed only in small, socially acceptable doses. The historical debate around this emotional suppression is fascinating. Why was there such a profound distrust of natural feeling? Some historians argue it was an extension of the broader Victorian obsession with order and control. In an age of rapid industrialization, burgeoning cities, and social upheaval, the home, and by extension, the nursery, was meant to be a sanctuary of perfect, predictable order. Uncontrolled emotions were a threat to this fragile ecosystem. Others point to the influence of evangelical Christianity, which was a powerful force during the era. This worldview saw children as being born with a tendency towards sin, a natural willfulness that needed to be broken and reshaped towards guidelines and obedience. A screaming child was just being difficult. They were exhibiting their fallen nature. Disciplining their emotions was a sacred duty, a way of saving their soul. This doesn't mean your childhood is devoid of affection. It just means that affection is conditional and expressed in very specific ways. A pat on the head from your father for reciting a Bible verse correctly. A rare, warm smile from your mother when you sit quietly through her brief visit. A piece of barley sugar from your nanny for not fussing while having your hair brushed. You learn that love and approval are rewards for good behavior, which is defined primarily by quietness, obedience, and the suppression of your own inconvenient feelings. You are being taught a powerful, lifelong lesson in masking. You are learning to present a calm, composed exterior, no matter what turmoil might be whirling inside. This is the very foundation of the famous British stiff upper lip. It's not a genetic trait, it's a learned behavior, and the lessons start here, in the quiet, orderly, and emotionally rarefied air of the nursery. Your inner world is your own private business. The world at large is only interested in the carefully curated version you present. And this training is about to become even more formal, as you prepare to graduate from the domain of the nanny to the even more structured world of the governess. Just as you've mastered the intricate politics and unspoken rules of the nursery, the ground shifts beneath your feet. Around the age of 6 or 7, you are deemed too old for the nanny's sole care. The world of instinct, impulse, and basic discipline is behind you. Now begins the age of formal intellect and moral instruction. You are moving out of the nursery and into the schoolroom. And this transition is personified by the arrival of a new, and in many ways more formidable, figure, the governess. The governess is not a servant in the same way your nanny was. She occupies a strange, lonely position in the household hierarchy. She is not family, so she doesn't dine with your parents or join their social gatherings. But she is also not considered a typical domestic servant. She is an educated lady, albeit an impoverished one. This social limbo often made her a solitary and sometimes melancholy figure, a ghost flitting between the upstairs world of your family and the downstairs world of the staff. She often eats her meals alone or with you in the schoolroom. Her arrival marks a significant change in your daily life. The schoolroom, which might be the former day nursery or a different room entirely, is now your primary domain. It's a space dedicated to learning, and its decor reflects that. There are no frivolous toys. Instead, you are surrounded by maps, a globe, a large slate or blackboard, and shelves of sober-looking books bound in dark leather or cloth. The fireplace might have a tall guard around it, not just for safety, but to discourage idle lingering. This is your new office, and your workday is about to begin. Your relationship with the governess is fundamentally different from the one you had with your nanny. Your nanny was concerned with your body, your health, your cleanliness, your physical habits. The governess is concerned with your mind and your soul. She is there to fill the blank slate of your mind with knowledge, and more importantly, with the correct moral and social principles. Her qualifications could vary wildly. A highly sought-after governess might be fluent in French and German, proficient in piano and watercolor, and possess a thorough knowledge of history, geography, and literature. A less qualified one might only have a basic education herself, just enough to stay one step ahead of her young charges. Her employment depended entirely on her ability to impart the accomplishments deemed necessary for a child of your station. Your lessons are long and grueling. A typical day might start at 8 and, with a break for a simple lunch, continue until 4 or 5 p.m. The curriculum is heavy on rote memorization. You spend hours reciting dates from English history, listing the capitals of European nations, memorizing long passages of poetry, and conjugating French verbs. There is very little emphasis on critical thinking or creative exploration. The goal is not to teach you how to think, but what to think. Education is about absorption, not inquiry. And this is where we find one of the more curious educational tools of the era. The backboard. This was a long, straight piece of wood, sometimes with a collar for the neck, that you would be strapped into for several hours a day. Its purpose was to force you to sit up perfectly straight, ensuring you developed a graceful, erect posture, a hallmark of good breeding. You might have to do your lessons, eat your lunch, or practice the piano while strapped to this device. It was uncomfortable and constraining, a physical manifestation of the mental rigidity being imposed upon you. It was seen as cruel. It was considered an essential part of your physical and social training. The true nature of the relationship between a governess and her pupils is a staple of Victorian literature, from Jane Eyre to the turn of the screw. Why this fascination? Historians suggest it's because the governess represents a point of tension and intimacy. She was a stranger brought into the heart of the family, tasked with shaping the next generation. She could be a cherished mentor and a gateway to the world of ideas. She could also be a figure of resentment, a constant, nagging reminder of your intellectual and behavioral shortcomings. For many children, she was the most significant adult in their lives, spending more waking hours with them than their own parents. The bond could be one of genuine affection and intellectual companionship, where frat power struggle confined to the four walls of the schoolroom. The historical record is full of both, of adults looking back with fondness on the woman who taught them to love Shakespeare, and of others who remembered their governess only as a source of endless correction and lonely frustration. For you, she is your new reality. She dictates your schedule, judges your progress, and corrects your posture. She is the keeper of knowledge and the enforcer of intellectual discipline. The cozy, if restrictive, world of the nursery is gone. You have entered a more demanding, more cerebral, and infinitely more complex stage of your young life. Your life in the schoolroom is governed by one overriding principle. There is a right way and a wrong way to do everything. And the right way is almost always the harder, more complicated, and less natural way. Your education is not about fostering a love of learning. It's about downloading a massive, intricate software program of social conduct. The primary textbook for this is not Shakespeare or Euclid, but an unwritten, and sometimes explicitly written, code of etiquette. You learn that how you do something is infinitely more important than what you are doing. Take walking, for instance. You don't just walk into a room. You learn to enter a room quietly, without fanfare. You learn to close the door behind you softly, without letting it slam. You learn how to stand, shoulders back, chin up, hands loosely clasped towards your sides, never in your pockets. Fidgeting is a cardinal sin. You are taught to control every muscle, to project an aura of common self-possession, even if you're bored to tears. Conversation is a minefield of rules. You are taught never to interrupt an adult. In fact, you are taught not to speak unless spoken to. When you are addressed, you must look the person in the eye, but not stare, which is insolent. You must respond in a clear, well-modulated voice, not too loud and not too soft. You are given lists of vulgar words or phrases to avoid. Slang, however mild, is out of the question. Expressing a strong, uninvited opinion is considered precocious and rude. Your role in any adult conversation is to be an attentive, silent, and agreeable ornament. This obsession with rules extended to the most mundane activities. You are taught how to write a formal letter, with the correct salutation, the proper phrasing for invitations and acceptances, and the precise way to fold the paper and seal the envelope. Your handwriting, or penmanship, is scrutinized mercilessly, admitted to be neat, regular, and elegant. A sloppy hand was thought to reflect a sloppy mind and poor character. To enforce these rules, your governess relies on a vast library of instructional materials. There were countless etiquette books and moral tales published for children, with titles like The Good Boys and Girls' Own Book of Manners or Routledge's Manual of Etiquette. These books laid out, in painstaking detail, the do's and don'ts of polite society. They contain chapters on table manners, conduct in public, conversation, and even how to manage one's thoughts. They were filled with cautionary tales of children who slouched, spoke out of turn, or used a fork improperly, and who, as a result, came to a bad end socially. You might spend hours memorizing these rules, just as you would memorize historical dates. One of the more peculiar areas of instruction was the language of the fan for girls, or the language of the calling card for boys. While this was often more for teenagers and young adults, the foundations were laid in childhood. A girl might learn that holding a fan in a certain way could convey a specific message across a crowded room, a silent and highly codified form of communication. A boy would learn the complex rules of leaving a calling card, when to leave one, how many to leave, and how to fold a corner to signify a particular purpose for the visit. It was a world of subtle signals and unspoken meanings, and mastering them was crucial for social survival. But what if you broke these rules? The consequences were more about shame than physical punishment, though that certainly existed. You might be forced to copy out lines from an etiquette manual. You might be publicly corrected in front of a visitor, a moment of acute humiliation. The ultimate punishment was being deemed unfit for company. If your manners were not up to scratch, you would be banished back to the schoolroom during your mother's at-home day or when guests came for dinner, a clear signal that you had failed to meet the required standard. The sheer volume of these rules has led historians to wonder about their psychological impact. Did this constant correction and microscopic focus on external behavior crush a child's spirit and creativity? Or did it provide a sense of security and structure in a confusing world? The scholarly consensus leans toward the former, suggesting that this system was designed to produce compliant, predictable adults who fit neatly into a rigid social hierarchy. It was less about building character and more about building a facade. The emphasis was on performance. Your true self, your spontaneous thoughts, your quirky habits, your natural impulses, was something to be suppressed and hidden behind a carefully constructed, well-mannered shield. So you spend your days in a state of constant self-monitoring. Is my back straight? Are my hands still? Am I using the right fork? Is my voice too loud? It is exhausting. But you are learning the great lesson of your time in class. Your value is not determined by who you are on the inside, but by how flawlessly you can perform the role you have been assigned. In this tightly controlled world of rules and etiquette, your failures to comply are not overlooked. Misbehavior is seen as a moral failing that requires immediate and firm correction. The Victorian approach to discipline was rooted in the proverb, "Spare the rod and spoil the child." This was just a folk saying. For many, it was a guiding principle, a divine instruction for raising righteous, obedient children. Physical punishment wasn't accepted, and often expected, part of your upbringing. The tools of the trade were common household objects. A hairdress, a ruler, a leather slipper, or a thin, flexible cane known as a switch were all standard instruments of discipline. A sharp rap on the knuckles with a ruler for inattentiveness during lessons, or a few swift strokes on the backside with a slipper for a fit of temper. These were considered routine and necessary corrections. The punishment was often delivered calmly and deliberately by your governess or nanny, and sometimes, for more serious transgressions, by your father. It was framed not as an act of anger, but as a painful but necessary lesson for your own good. "This will hurt me more than it hurts you," was a common, if not entirely convincing, refrain. However, the Victorian era also saw the rise of a competing, and in some ways more psychologically intense, form of discipline, moral suasion. This was the preferred method of many enlightened parents and educators, particularly those influenced by the evangelical movement. Instead of simply beating the bad behavior out of you, the goal was to make you understand the depth of your wrongdoing and feel genuine remorse. This process could be far more harrowing than a simple spanking. If you lied, for example, you wouldn't just be punished. You would be sat down for a long, solemn lecture. Your governess or parent would speak to you in a low, sorrowful tone, explaining how your lie had not only broken a rule, but had deeply disappointed them. They would talk about how your dishonesty had grieved God. You might be forced to read biblical passages about the evils of falsehood. The aim was to awaken your conscience, to fill you with a powerful sense of guilt and shame that would prevent you from ever wanting to lie again. You would be encouraged to pray for forgiveness and to reflect on your sin. This emotional and psychological pressure could be incredibly potent, creating a deep-seated anxiety about moral failure that would follow you into adulthood. One of the more unusual and telling disciplinary tactics was the dunce gap. If you were slow to learn a lesson or gave a foolish answer, you might be forced to sit in the corner of the schoolroom wearing a tall, conical paper hat, sometimes with the word dunce written on it. This was punishment by humiliation. It separated you from your siblings, marking you as a failure. It was a visible symbol of your intellectual inadequacy, designed to motivate you through shame. Well, it seems almost cartoonish to us now. It was a real and deeply mortifying experience for a child. Historians continue to debate the effectiveness and prevalence of these different disciplinary methods. Was corporal punishment more common in certain classes? Did moral suasion truly replace the rod? Or did they exist side by side? The evidence from diaries, letters, and autobiographies suggests a complex picture. Many households used a combination of both. A minor offense might earn you a stern lecture, while a major one would result in a caning. The choice of method often depended on the temperament of the parent or educator and the perceived severity of the child's crime. Some historians argue that the shift towards psychological discipline was not necessarily more humane, but simply a more sophisticated form of control, aiming to regulate a child's inner world, not just their outward behavior. The ultimate goal of all this discipline was to break your will. A child's independent will was seen as the root of all sin and disobedience. It was the enemy that had to be conquered. A well-raised child was one whose will was completely subordinate to that of their parents and, by extension, to God. This is a stark contrast to modern parenting, which often aims to foster a child's independence and sense of self. In your world, a strong will is not a virtue. It is a defect to be corrected. So whether through a sharp physical pain or a heavy weight of guilt, you learn the central lesson of your childhood. Obedience is the highest virtue. You learn to fear the sting of the cane, but perhaps, even more, you learn to fear the quiet, sorrowful look of disappointment in a parent's eyes. You are being molded, through pain and through shame, into a person who understands authority and their place within it. Your spirit, with all its natural wildness and defiance, is being systematically tamed. Even your playtime is not truly free. In the highly structured world of the Victorian schoolroom, play was seen as yet another opportunity for instruction. Your toys were not just for fun. They were tools for moral and educational development. Every doll, every building block, every board game came with a built-in lesson. The concept of play for play's sake was a frivolous, even dangerous, idea. Your leisure time, like all other time, had to be productive. If you are a girl, your primary companion is a doll. But this is not a soft, cuddly friend. Your doll is a miniature adult, usually made of porcelain, with a fragile, unsmiling face and a body of stitched leather or cloth. She is dressed in elaborate, fashionable clothes that mimic the adult world. Playing with her is a rehearsal for your future role as a wife and mother. You don't just play with your doll, you manage her. You are responsible for her wardrobe, her manners, and her moral conduct. You host tiny tea parties where you practice the rituals of social calling. You create scenarios where your doll is naughty and must be disciplined, mimicking the lessons you receive from your own governess. The doll is your first domestic management project. If you are a boy, your toys are geared towards empire, industry, and warfare. You have legions of toy soldiers, meticulously cast and lead. You spend hours reenacting famous British military victories, learning the principles of strategy and the glory of the empire. You have construction sets, like the German-made Ankerstein Bauxens, Ankerstone building blocks, which were architectural sets made of real miniature stone blocks. With these, you don't just build a tower, you build a cathedral, a fortress, or a bridge, learning the principles of engineering and architecture. The message is clear. Your future is about building, managing, and defending. Board games were incredibly popular, but they were rarely about simple luck or strategy. They were almost always moral pilgrimage games. Your game piece would travel along a path, and the squares you landed on would reward virtue or punish vice. A game called The Mansion of Bliss was a classic example. Landing on a square marked piety or industry would allow you to advance, while landing on idleness or disobedience would send you back several spaces. The winner was the first to reach the final square, which represented heaven or a state of moral perfection. These games were a thinly veiled form of catechism, drilling the era's moral code into you through the medium of play. There was no escaping the lesson. One of the more fascinating and slightly grim categories of educational toys was the dissected puzzle. the precursor to the modern jigsaw puzzle. But instead of pictures of cute animals or fantasy scenes, your puzzles were often maps or historical timelines. You would literally piece together the counties of England or the chronological order of the kings and queens. It was rote memorization disguised as a puzzle. Some of these were incredibly complex, with hundreds of tiny, oddly shaped pieces. It was a test of patience and knowledge, not a relaxing pastime. Even your engagement with the natural world was curated and educational. If you went for a walk in the garden or the park, you were not meant to simply run around. You were encouraged to collect flowers, leaves, or insects, and then bring them back to the schoolroom to be identified, pressed, or drawn. This was the age of the amateur naturalist. It was a popular and respectable hobby, but it turned a simple walk into another lesson in botany or entomology. The natural world was a text to be studied, not a playground to be enjoyed. Historians are still exploring the child's perspective in all of this. Did children find genuine joy in these didactic toys, or did they secretly resent them? The evidence is mixed. On one hand, these were the only toys they knew, and children have an amazing capacity to find fun in anything. A set of architectural blocks could become a castle for an imaginary dragon, despite its intended purpose. On the other hand, memoirs from the period are full of accounts of secret, illicit play, games made up with pebbles and twigs, or forbidden stories whispered after the governess had gone to bed. This suggests a desire for a world of imagination that was truly their own, free from the constant pressure to learn and improve. The very idea of a toy being purely for amusement was a concept that was only just beginning to emerge towards the end of the century, with the rise of a new middle-class consumer culture and changing ideas about childhood. But for you, in the thick of the mid-Victorian era, your toys are your teachers. They are silent, ever-present reminders of your future duties and the moral path you are expected to walk. Your playtime is scheduled, supervised, and purposeful. The day finally comes. After years of practicing with your dollhouse, tea sets and memorizing rules from an etiquette book, you are granted a significant promotion. You are invited to dine with the adults. This is not a casual family meal. It is a formal audience, a practical exam for which you have been studying your entire life. Failure is not an option. The summons usually comes for the midday meal, which in an upper-class household is a formal luncheon, not the grand dinner party. Dinner parties were strictly for adults. But even luncheon is an intimidating affair. You are scrubbed, combed, and dressed in your best, most restrictive clothing. You enter the dining room not with excitement, but with a sense of quiet dread. The room itself is imposing. A vast, polished mahogany table gleams under the light. Heavy silver cutlery is laid out in a bewildering array. Starched linen napkins are folded into elaborate shapes. Your parents are there, of course, but they seem different. No sorma. There might also be guests, strangers whose discerning eyes will be upon you. You are seated, and the first and most important rule is immediately in effect. You are to be seen and not heard. This is the mantra of your childhood, and nowhere is it more rigorously enforced than at the dining table. You do not speak unless an adult addresses you directly. You do not volunteer a story. You do not ask a question. You do not complain about the food. You are, in essence, a piece of living decoration, a testament to your parents' successful child rearing. Your posture is critical. You must sit up straight, never leaning back in your chair. Your elbows are never, ever to rest on the table. Your hands, when not actively engaged in eating, must rest in your lap. You eat slowly, taking small bites. Chewing with your mouth open is a horror of unimaginable proportions. Making any sound while eating, a slurp, a clink of the fork against your teeth, is a cause for instant mortification and a sharp, corrective glance from your mother or governess, who is likely also present, watching your every move. The cutlery is a challenge. You have been drilled on this. But the pressure is immense. Which fork is for the fish? Which knife is for the meat? How do you use a fish knife? A specialized and slightly odd-looking utensil designed to separate the flesh from the bone without cutting it. It has a broad, dull-bladed, pointed tip, and using it correctly is a mark of good breeding. The simple act of eating soup is fraught with peril. You must sip it from the side of the spoon, not the tip, and you must not tilt the bowl to get the last drops. Even the way you handle your bread is codified. You do not bite into a dinner roll. You break off a small piece with your fingers and then butter that single piece. Everything is designed to be delicate, controlled, and unobtrusive. This intense focus on table manners has led to some interesting historical debates. Why this obsession? For one, it was a clear and easy way to distinguish the well-bred from the new money or the lower classes. Knowing which fork to use was a secret handshake, a signal that you belonged. But some scholars suggest it was also about self-control. The dining table was a microcosm of society. If you could control your animalistic urges to eat quickly and greedily, you could control your passions in all other areas of life. It was a physical manifestation of the moral discipline that had been drilled into you. If you commit a faux pas, and you inevitably will, the correction is swift and quiet. A pointed look from your mother, a subtle shake of the head, or if the error is more egregious, your governess might quietly murmur the rule in your ear. The goal is to correct you without drawing the attention of the guests, as your mistake reflects poorly on the entire family. The humiliation is private, but no less acute. You leave the meal feeling not full and satisfied, but mentally exhausted. You have survived. You have passed the test. For now, as you grow older, you will be invited to the table more often, and the expectations will only increase. You will be expected to make small, polite conversation, to show intelligent interest in the adult topics being discussed, without offering too strong an opinion, and to navigate the social dynamics with grace. But for now, as you are dismissed from the table and retreat back to the relative freedom of the schoolroom, you are left with a profound understanding. The family meal is not about family. It is not about nourishment or bonding. It is a performance, and you're just a junior actor, hoping you remembered all your lines. Your ordeal at the dining table isn't just about mastering the etiquette. It's also about enduring the food itself. The Victorian ideal for a child's diet was guided by a single, powerful principle: simplicity. But this was a specific kind of simplicity, one that bordered on deliberate blandness. The prevailing medical and moral theory was that rich, flavorful, and overly stimulating foods were bad for a child's developing system and, more importantly, for their moral character. Spices, rich sauces, and elaborate pastries were seen as adult indulgences. It was believed that these exciting flavors could overstimulate a child's delicate nerves, leading to excitability, passion, and even immoral thoughts. A child's palate, like their mind, was meant to be kept pure and uncorked. The goal was to nourish the body without awakening the senses. As a result, your meals are a monotonous rotation of plain, boiled, or roasted dishes. A typical lunch in the schoolroom, eaten with your governess, is a study in beige. You might have a slice of roast mutton, served without any sauce, or perhaps boiled chicken. The vegetables are almost always boiled into submission. Cabbage, potatoes, carrots, cooked until they are soft and watery. Seasoning is minimal, usually just a sprinkle of salt. The idea of adding garlic, herbs, or any kind of spice was considered not only unhealthy but vaguely foreign and suspect. Puddings, the highlight of any meal for a modern child, are also exercises in restraint. You don't get chocolate cake or creamy trifles. You get simple, starchy puddings, rice pudding, made with milk and a little sugar, perhaps with a skin on top that you have to choke down. Or a soup pudding, a heavy, dense steamed cake made from flour and beef fat. Sometimes you might have a milk pudding, like junket or blancmange, a wobbly, gelatinous substance with a faint, milky flavor. Fruit is acceptable, but usually in the form of a baked apple or a simple stewed bar, its tartness barely tempered by sugar. This dietary philosophy was backed by the medical authorities of the day. In popular child care manuals, parents were explicitly warned against feeding their children the same food as adults. One guide from the 1862 sternly advises that pastry, rich cakes, and confectionery are unfit for a child's stomach. Another cautions that spices injure the coats of the stomach and lead to a morbid craving for stimulants later in life, linking a childhood taste for pepper with an adult descent into alcoholism. But perhaps one of the most peculiar and widely held dietary beliefs of the time concerned the cooling properties of certain foods. Cucumbers, for example, were considered a cooling food, but were also thought to be difficult to digest and potentially dangerous. There's a strange, almost folkloric bit of advice that appears in some domestic manuals. If you eat cucumber, you must drink a glass of sherry immediately afterward to counteract its ill effects. This, of course, did not apply to you as a child, so cucumbers were likely off your menu entirely. It's a perfect example of the blend of folk wisdom and pseudoscience that governed Victorian life. Historians are still untangling the class and ideological dimensions of this bland diet. Was it purely based on these moral and medical theories? Or was it also a way of reinforcing discipline and hierarchy? By feeding children simple, uninteresting food, you were teaching them to subordinate their desires and accept what they were given without complaint. It was another lesson in self-denial. It's also worth noting that for the vast majority of the population, the working classes, this diet would have seemed perfectly normal, or even aspirational. The luxury of choice was something only the wealthy could afford, and they chose, for their children at least, to impose austerity. So you eat your boiled mutton and your watery cabbage. You learn to swallow the lumpy rice pudding without making a face. You are not eating for pleasure. You are eating for sustenance and for the good of your character. The food is fuel, nothing more. It is another reminder that your childhood is not about enjoyment or self-expression, but about being molded, inside and out. And as you grow, the external molding is about to become much more pronounced and, frankly, much more uncomfortable, as you begin to be squeezed into the highly gendered clothing of your time. The day of your breaching arrives. It is a momentous occasion, the sartorial equivalent of a coronation. After years spent in the gender-neutral world of white dresses, you, as a boy of 5 or 6, are finally initiated into the cult of masculinity. You shed your skirts for the last time and on your first pair of trousers. This isn't just a change of clothes. It's a fundamental shift in your identity and in how the world perceives you. Your father, who may have been a distant figure up until now, suddenly takes a more active interest. He might take you to the tailor himself. The breeching is a signal that you are leaving the domain of women, the nursery and the schoolroom, and entering the world of men. You are now his heir in a more visible sense, a miniature version of himself. Your first suit is likely to be a skeleton suit, a popular style for young boys in the early to mid-Victorian period. It consists of a pair of high-waisted trousers that button directly onto a short, tight-fitting jacket. It's not particularly comfortable, restricting your movement, but it is the uniform of your new status. However, as the century progresses, another style becomes overwhelmingly popular, so much so that it defines the image of the Victorian boy, the sailor suit. The sailor suit craze was sparked by a single, iconic portrait. In 1846, Queen Victoria commissioned the famous court painter France, Eva Winterhalter, to paint a portrait of her eldest son, Albert Edward, the future King Edward VII. He was 5 years old, and she had him dressed in a miniature version of the official uniform of the Royal Navy. The painting was a sensation. Suddenly, every mother in Britain, and soon, across Europe and America, wanted to dress her son like a little prince. The sailor suit became the must-have outfit for any well-to-do boy. So, you are put into a sailor suit. It has a blue or white blouse with a distinctive square collar, often trimmed with stripes, and a black silk neckerchief tied in a neat knot. The trousers are either long and flared like a bell bottom, or short knickerbockers that buckle at the knee. On your head, you wear a straw sailor hat with a ribbon bearing the name of a real or fictional ship, like H. B. S. Invincible. You look incredibly smart, a walking piece of patriotic propaganda. The suit connects you, symbolically, to the might and glory of the British Navy, the cornerstone of the empire. It instills a sense of national pride and masculine duty. But beneath the smart appearance, the reality is that the uniform is, once again, deeply uncomfortable. The wool serge is itchy. The stiffly starched collar scratches your neck. The neckerchief feels tight and constricting. And running around and playing boisterous games in such a structured outfit is a challenge. It's clothing designed for inspection, not for action. This is also the age when you start learning about the hidden, coded language of men's attire. You learn that certain hats are for certain occasions. A top hat for formal events, a bowler for business, a straw booter for summer leisure. You learn the importance of polished shoes, a clean collar, and a perfectly tied cravat. These are not just details. They are signals of your class, your profession, and your respectability. A particularly peculiar and often overlooked element of a boy's wardrobe was the corset. While we strongly associate corsetry with women, it was not uncommon for boys, and men, to wear them as well. For boys, a corset was worn to enforce the upright, manly posture that was so prized. It was a kind of backboard you could wear under your clothes, training your body to hold itself in the approved military straight fashion. It was yet another tool for discipline, shaping you physically just as your lessons were shaping you mentally. Historians are still debating the full implications of this masculine uniform. Did dressing every boy in a sailor suit promote a sense of conformity and suppress individuality? Or did it provide a clear and comforting sense of identity and belonging? Some scholars argue that it was a key part of training boys for a life in a hierarchical, rule-based society, whether that be in the military, the civil service, or the corporate world. You learned to wear a uniform and to understand your place within a larger structure. Your clothes were a constant reminder that you were part of a team, an empire, a tradition. You were not just a boy. You were a future leader, a defender of the faith, and a servant of the Queen. And you were expected to dress the part, no matter how much the color itched. While your brother is being initiated into the world of men with his sailor suits and scratchy collars, your sartorial journey, as a girl, takes a different but equally restrictive path. You too graduate from the simple white dresses of early childhood, but instead of moving toward simplicity and practicality, your clothing becomes a masterpiece of complexity and ornamentation. You are being transformed from a child into a living doll, a walking advertisement for your family's wealth and status. Your dresses are no longer simple cotton shifts. They are made from richer fabrics, silk, taffeta, fine wool, and velvet for special occasions. They are covered in layers of frills, ruffles, lace, and ribbons. The colors become more varied, though young girls were still expected to wear lighter, more innocent shades like pale pink, blue, and primrose yellow. The silhouette begins to mimic, in miniature, the fashionable shape of adult women. This means a fitted bodice, a wide skirt, and a waistline that is increasingly emphasized. And beneath the beautiful outer dress lies a complex architecture of undergarments that dictate your shape and posture. You wear a chemise, drawers, which were often open at the crotch for practicality until you were older, and then multiple starched petticoats to give your skirt the required volume. The sheer weight and bulk of these layers make running, jumping, or even sitting comfortably a challenge. Your movement is deliberately hampered. You are being taught to be decorative, not active. As you approach your teens, the ultimate symbol of this fashionable restriction is introduced: the corset. While your brother might have worn a posture-improving corset, yours has a different purpose. It is designed to cinch your waist, creating the tiny, wasp-waist silhouette that was the height of fashion. You are laced in tightly every morning, the strings pulled taut by your mother or a maid. It restricts your breathing and makes it difficult to bend. The long-term health consequences could be severe: deformed ribs, compressed organs, but these were considered a small price to pay for achieving the perfect, fashionable figure. Then comes the crinoline. In the mid-Victorian period, the massive, bell-shaped skirt was supported by a cage-like structure made of steel hoops. You wear this cage under your petticoats. It's lighter than wearing dozens of heavy petticoats, but it presents its own set of problems. You have to learn how to navigate doorways, how to sit down without the cage flying up in your face, and how to avoid knocking over small tables and ornaments. It creates a personal space bubble around you, physically isolating you and making normal, boisterous play impossible. One of the strangest and most dangerous fashion hazards of the era was the fabric itself. In the 1860s, a new, vibrant green dye became incredibly popular. This Chiles green was used for everything from dresses to wallpaper to artificial flowers. It was beautiful, but it was also deadly. The pigment was made with arsenic. A woman or girl wearing a green dress could be slowly poisoning herself, absorbing the arsenic through her skin. The dust from the fabric could be inhaled, causing illness or death. Factory workers who produced the dye suffered horribly. It's a grim reminder that the pursuit of fashion could be a genuinely life-threatening endeavor. Historians often discuss the dollification of the Victorian girl. Your elaborate, restrictive clothing turned you into a precious object to be admired, but not touched. It reinforced the idea that your value lay in your beauty and your ornamental qualities. The clothes were a physical manifestation of the social constraints placed upon you. You were being trained for a life of quiet, domestic display. Your brother's clothes prepared him for action in the world. Yours prepared you for a life of being looked at in the drawing room. This stark difference in clothing has been the subject of much academic debate. Was it simply a reflection of the rigid gender roles of the time, or did it actively help create and enforce them? The consensus is that it was a powerful tool of social conditioning. By dressing a girl in clothes that prevented her from running and playing freely, you were teaching her from a young age that her sphere was passive and domestic. You were shaping not just her body, but her sense of what was possible for her in the world. So, you stand patiently while being laced, buttoned, and adorned. You learn to move gracefully in your cage, to keep your frills clean, to be the perfect, pretty picture your parents expect. You are a work of art, a symbol of femininity, and a prisoner of your own beautiful clothes. Your physical freedom has been exchanged for a vision of fashionable perfection. In a world before antibiotics and widespread vaccination, illness is not a minor inconvenience. It is a constant, terrifying presence. A simple sore throat can escalate into diphtheria. A cough can become whooping cough or pneumonia, and a fever can signal the onset of scarlet fever or measles. These were not just childhood sicknesses. They were potential death sentences. The nursery, with its close quarters, could become an incubator for tragedy. When you fall ill, the first response is a wave of anxiety that ripples through the household. You are immediately isolated, confined to your bed in the night nursery. The schoolroom routine is suspended. The atmosphere becomes hushed and somber. Your mother, usually a distant figure, may become more present, her face etched with worry. The power dynamic shifts from the governess back to the nanny, who is more experienced in the practicalities of sickness, cooling a fevered brow, administering medicine, and sitting vigil through the long nights. The family doctor is summoned. He arrives in his formal coat, carrying a leather bag that smells of antiseptic and unknown chemicals. His examination is based more on observation and tradition than on the scientific diagnostics we know today. He will look at your tongue, feel your pulse, listen to your chest, and perhaps ask about your evacuations, as bowel movements were politely called. His diagnosis is based on a constellation of symptoms, and the treatments he prescribes are a reflection of the medical knowledge, and lack thereof, of the time. The treatments themselves can often feel worse than the illness. Heroic medicine was still a common practice, the belief that drastic intervention was needed to shock the body back into health. This meant you might be subjected to purging and blistering. You could be given powerful emetics to make you vomit or purgatives like castor oil or calomel, a mercury-based compound, to violently clear your bowels. The idea was to expel the poisons of the disease from your body. In reality, these treatments often left you dangerously dehydrated and weakened, making you more vulnerable to the illness itself. Another common treatment was blistering. A caustic paste would be applied to your skin, usually on the chest or back, to create a painful blister. It was believed that this would draw the inflammation and sickness out from the deeper organs to the surface. It was an agonizing procedure that left permanent scars. For a cough or chest congestion, you might be forced to inhale the steam from a kettle of boiling water, sometimes with tinctures of noxious-smelling compounds added. Or you might have a thick, foul-smelling poultice made of mustard or onions plastered onto your chest. One of the most curious and enduring home remedies, often prescribed by both nannies and doctors, was for a persistent cough or croup. You might be given a spoonful of sugar soaked in goose grease or tallow, animal fat. It sounds disgusting, but the logic was that the fat would soothe and coat the irritated throat. Whether it worked or was simply a greasy placebo is a matter of historical speculation. Scholars digging through old home remedy books find countless such concoctions, blending folk wisdom with traces of medical theory in ways that seem bizarre to us now. The debate among historians about Victorian medicine is complex. Was it all just butchery and quackery? Not entirely. The 19th century was a period of immense medical progress. The link between dirt and disease was beginning to be understood, leading to a greater emphasis on sanitation and hygiene. The sanitary idea. The use of anesthetics like ether and chloroform was becoming more common, revolutionizing surgery. And by the end of the century, Louis Spitz's to rest germ theory would change everything. However, this progress was slow to filter down into everyday domestic practice. For much of your childhood, you are caught in the overlap between old superstitions and new, unproven sciences. Your survival often depends less on the doctor's intervention and more on the strength of your own immune system and the diligence of your nanny's care. So you lie in your bed, feverish and miserable. The world shrinks to the four walls of your room. The only sounds are the ticking of the clock and the rustle of your nanny's apron. You swallow the strange medicines and endure the uncomfortable treatments, dimly aware of the fear in the eyes of the adults around you. Being sick is not a time for extra sympathy or coddling in the modern sense. It's a battle. It's a fight for survival in a world where childhood is a fragile, precious state, easily extinguished by an invisible foe. Beyond the discipline of the governess and the rules of etiquette, there is another, more pervasive form of surveillance in your life, the watchful eye of God. Religion is not just for Sundays. In the Victorian era, particularly within the influential evangelical movement, Christianity permeates every aspect of your daily existence. It is the ultimate framework for your moral education, and its central message, as presented to you, is one of duty, obedience, and a constant awareness of your own potential for sin. Your day is bookended by prayer. You kneel by your bedside upon waking to say your morning prayers, and you do the same before sleeping. Grace is said before every meal, but the religious instruction goes much deeper. A significant portion of your schoolroom time is dedicated to Scripture. You don't just read the Bible, you memorize it. You are expected to recite long passages from the Psalms or the Gospels. You study Bible stories not as ancient history, but as direct moral lessons applicable to your own life. The story of Cain and Abel is a warning against jealousy. The story of the prodigal son is a lesson in repentance. Sunday is the focal point of the week, and it is a day of solemn observance, not recreation. All your usual toys and books are put away. Play is forbidden. The day is dedicated to rest and worship. You are dressed in your best, most uncomfortable clothes and taken to church. The services are long, often lasting for 2 hours or more, and the sermons are dense and complex, filled with theological arguments about sin, damnation, and redemption. You are expected to sit perfectly still and silent on the hard wooden pew, a supreme test of a child's endurance. Fidgeting or, heaven forbid, falling asleep would result in a stern reprimand later. The afternoon is spent in quiet, religious-themed activities. You might read from a book of sermons or a publication specifically for children, like the Sunday at Home, which was filled with moral tales, Bible puzzles, and hymns. You might be quizzed by your parents or governess on the morning's sermon to ensure you were paying attention. The entire day is designed to be spiritually edifying and, for a child, profoundly boring. A key element of this religious upbringing is the concept of a personal relationship with God. But this relationship is oft uncharacterized by fear. You are taught that God is always watching you. He sees not only your actions but your secret thoughts. A flash of anger toward your sibling, a moment of envy over a friend's new toy, a lazy or impure thought, all are known to God and are recorded in His book. This creates a powerful internal mechanism of control. The threat of divine displeasure and eternal punishment is a far more effective deterrent than any earthly discipline. One of the more peculiar manifestations of this intense religiosity was the deathbed narrative. These were hugely popular stories, found in children's magazines and books, that described in sentimental and often graphic detail the holy and peaceful deaths of pious children. These tales featured angelic, long-suffering children who, on their deathbeds, would forgive their enemies, convert their sinful relatives, and express their joyous anticipation of going to heaven. The most famous example is little Ava in Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. The purpose of these stories was to teach you not to fear death, provided you were a good Christian, and to encourage you to live a life of piety so that you, too, could have a good death. To a modern reader, they seem morbid and emotionally manipulated, but for the Victorians, they were a powerful to love moral instruction. The historical debate around Victorian religion is vast. Was this intense piety a genuine expression of deep faith? Or was it, for many, a form of social performance, a way to signal one's respectability and moral seriousness? Many scholars argue it was both. For some, like the famous social reformers Lord Shaftesbury or William Wilberforce, their evangelical faith was a genuine engine for social change, driving them to fight against child labor and slavery. For others, it could be a rigid and suffocating force, creating immense anxiety and guilt, particularly in children. The figure of the hypocritical, judgmental Christian is a common trope in the novels of Charles Dickens and George Eliot for a reason. For you, this religious framework is simply the reality you know. It provides a clear, if demanding, set of rules for living. It gives you a sense of order and purpose, but it also burdens you with a heavy sense of your own inadequacy and sinfulness. You are in a constant state of spiritual self-examination, always wondering if you are good enough. The God of your childhood is not a gentle, loving shepherd. He is a stern headmaster, and you are a pupil who is perpetually in danger of failing his final exam. Your interactions with other children are not the spontaneous, chaotic playdates of the modern world. They are carefully managed and highly ritualized events that look more like miniature diplomatic missions than carefree fun. Your friendships are not entirely of your own choosing. They are cultivated from a pre-approved list of socially acceptable families. Your playmates are the sons and daughters of your parents' friends and associates, children from families of equal or slightly higher social standing. A playdate is usually framed as a formal visit. Your nanny or governess would coordinate with her counterpart in the other household. You would be dispatched at a specific time, dressed in clean, presentable clothes, with strict instructions on how to behave. Upon arrival, you don't just run off to play. You are formally presented to the lady of the house, your friend's mother. You must perform a polite bow or curtsy and offer a quiet, rehearsed greeting. The play itself is almost always supervised. A nanny or governess is present, a watchful eye ensuring that the rules of decorum are followed. The activities are often structured. You might play with the educational toys in the nursery, engage in a moral pilgrimage board game, or, if the weather is fine, take a sedate walk in the garden. Wild, boisterous games that could lead to torn clothes or loud shouting are discouraged. The emphasis is on polite, cooperative play. Sharing is not just encouraged, it is strictly enforced. Any squabble over a toy is quickly shut down, not with a lesson in empathy, but with an appeal to good manners. You are a guest in this house, or they are a guest in yours. Politeness is paramount. Your behavior is a direct reflection on your family as breeding, and any failure on your part is a failure of your upbringing. One of the primary forms of social gathering for children was the party, but a Victorian children's party was a unique affair. They were often held in the afternoon and were highly structured. There would be organized games, like blind man's buff or charades, led by the adults. There would be a tea, with specific party food like small sandwiches, ice cakes, and perhaps a colorful jelly. The highlight of the party might be a magic lantern show, a precursor to the slide projector, where fantastical or educational images were projected onto a sheet. It was entertaining, but it was a passive, controlled form of entertainment. A particularly curious and revealing form of children's entertainment was the tableau vivants, or living pictures. You and the other children would dress up in costumes and pose motionless to recreate a famous painting or a scene from history or literature. This was considered a very refined and artistic amusement. But think about what it entails. The goal is to be still, silent, and decorative. It is the perfect metaphor for the ideal Victorian child, a beautiful picture to be admired, not an active participant. The nature of these controlled interactions has led historians to question the modern concept of friendship in this context. Were these children really forming deep, personal bonds, or were they simply learning to perform social roles with their peers? The answer is likely a bit of both. Within the rigid confines of these visits, genuine affection and camaraderie could certainly blossom. Shared secrets, inside jokes, and a mutual understanding of the pressures they were under could create powerful connections. However, the system was designed to prioritize social utility over personal chemistry. A suitable friend was one who reinforced your family's social standing, not necessarily one who understood your soul. This is especially true as you get older. For a boy, your friendships are increasingly about building a network. The boys you meet at parties and formal visits are the same boys you will later encounter at boarding school, at university, and in the professional world. These early contacts are the foundation of your future social and business life. For a girl, your friendships are a rehearsal for the world of adult female society. You learn the art of polite conversation, of issuing and receiving invitations, and of managing social relationships, all in preparation for your future role as a hostess and mistress of your own house. So you navigate this world of formal playdates and polite parties. You learn to make small talk with children you barely know. You learn to share the toy soldiers and the porcelain doll, to play the structured games, and to bow and curtsy at the appropriate times. You are learning that even your friendships are not entirely your own. They are part of the larger, intricate dance of society, and you must learn the steps perfectly. For you, as a boy, the sheltered, female-dominated world of the schoolroom has an expiration date. Around the age of 8 to 10, Sometimes a little older, your father decides it is time for you to become a man. And that means leaving home for the harsh, unyielding world of the public school, what Americans would call a private boarding school. This is not a choice. It is your destiny. It is the crucible in which the leaders of the British Empire are forged. The day of your departure is a strange mix of pride and terror. Your trunk is packed with your new school uniform, stiff new shirts, and a dizzying number of collars. Your mother might shed a few quiet tears. Your governess might give you a book as a parting gift. Your father will shake your hand, man to man, and tell you to be brave and uphold the family name. Then you are on a train, watching your familiar world recede as you hurtle toward an unknown future. The school that greets you is a formidable, often ancient, institution of stone buildings and sprawling grounds. It is a world run by men. For boys, the headmaster is a godlike figure, often a stern classicist and a clergyman. The masters are a mix of brilliant scholars and brutish disciplinarians. And your fellow students, the other boys, are now your constant companions and your fiercest rivals. Life is Spartan. You sleep in a long, cold dormitory with dozens of other boys. The beds are hard, the blankets are thin, and there is no privacy. You are woken by a clanging bell at an early hour, wash in a basin of ice-cold water, and march in line to the chapel for morning prayers. The food is famously terrible: grist dry meat, watery porridge, and endless boiled potatoes. This hardship is intentional. It is designed to build character, to strip away the softness of home and forge you into a tough, resilient man, uncomplaining, unself-reliant. The curriculum is relentlessly classical. You spend the vast majority of your time studying Latin and Greek. You translate Cicero, parse Homer, and write Latin verse. Modern languages, science, and history are considered secondary, if they are taught at all. The education is not designed to be practical. It is designed to be a mark of class. A deep knowledge of the classics was the sign of a gentleman, a shared cultural language that separated the elite from everyone else. Discipline is severe. The masters have the authority to cane you for any infraction, from a poorly prepared lesson to a moment of insolence. But the official discipline is often less fearsome than the unofficial system of control run by the boys themselves. The schools have a rigid internal hierarchy. The older boys, the prefects, have immense power over the younger ones. They can order you about, demand that you run their errands, a system known as fagging, and administer their own punishments. Bullying is rampant and is often seen by the masters as a natural part of the process, a way of weeding out the weak. A particularly strange and revealing aspect of boarding school life was the development of a unique school slang. Each school had its own private vocabulary, a secret code that was impenetrable to outsiders. At Harrow, for example, a lecture was a tolle, and a boy might be messed, punished, for being late. This slang served to strengthen the bonds within the school community, creating a powerful sense of shared identity and exclusion. Learning it was a crucial part of your assimilation. Historians and linguists have studied these slang dictionaries, seeing them as a fascinating window into the closed, tribal world of the Victorian public school. The true purpose of this harsh system is a subject of ongoing historical debate. Proponents, they don't know, argued that it produced leaders. They claimed it taught self-reliance, fostered lifelong friendships, built boy network, and instilled a powerful sense of duty and fair play, particularly through the emphasis on team sports like cricket and rugby. The Battle of Waterloo, the Duke of Wellington famously, and probably a apocryphal lie, said, was won on the playing fields of Eton. Critics, however, point to the immense psychological damage this system could inflict. They argue it created emotionally stunted men, unable to express vulnerability, who were trained to bully and dominate. It separated them from their families at a young age, replacing the intimacy of home with the brutal politics of the tribe. It fostered a culture of conformity and anti-intellectualism, where athletic prowess was often valued more highly than academic achievement. You, however, are not debating the merits of the system. You are living it. You learn to survive. You learn to hide your fear and your homesickness. You learn the complex social codes, who to befriend and who to avoid. You learn to endure the cold, the bad food, and the casual cruelty. You are being broken down and rebuilt according to a specific blueprint. The boy who left home is disappearing, and in his place, a public school man is being forged. While your brother is being toughened up at boarding school, your education, as a young lady, intensifies, but its purpose narrows dramatically. You are not being prepared for a career, for a university, or for a life in the public sphere. Every lesson, every skill you acquire, is directed toward a single, all-important goal, making a good merit. Your education is not about personal fulfillment. It's about increasing your value on the aristocratic and upper middle-class marriage market. The academic subjects you studied with your governess, history, geography, literature, continue, but they are often given less importance as you enter your teens. The emphasis shifts decisively to the accomplishments. These are the decorative skills that will demonstrate your refinement, taste, and good breeding to potential suitors and their discerning mothers. Music is paramount. You spend hours every day practicing the piano. You are not expected to become a virtuoso, but you must be able to play pleasant drawing room pieces with grace and feeling. Being able to accompany yourself or others while singing is also a highly prized skill. Your musical ability is not for your own artistic expression. It is a form of domestic entertainment, a way to beautify the home and soothe the husband after a long day. Drawing and watercolor painting are also essential accomplishments. You learn to sketch pleasant landscapes, arrange and paint a still life of flowers, or copy famous works of art. Again, the goal is not to become a great artist, but to demonstrate your delicate sensibilities and your ability to create beauty. Your finished artworks might be framed and hung in the drawing room or collected in a beautifully bound album, a portfolio of your accomplishments to be subtly displayed to visitors. You must be fluent in at least one modern language, usually French, the language of diplomacy and high culture. You might also learn German or Italian. This linguistic skill is not for international business or travel, but for adding a cosmopolitan gloss to your conversation and for demonstrating the quality of your education. And then, there is needlework. You learn exquisite, intricate forms of embroidery, needlepoint, and lace-making. You might spend months working on a decorative fire screen panel or a set of embroidered pillowcases for your bottom drawer, the collection of household linens you prepare for your future home. This skill is a testament to your patience, your dexterity, and your domesticity. It proves you have the temperament to manage a household. One of the more peculiar skills you might be taught is the art of Japanning or decalcomania. This involved decorating objects like boxes, screens, or small pieces of furniture with cut-out prints and then varnishing them to look like Asian lacquerware or painted porcelain. It was a fashionable and highly gendered hobby, another way to demonstrate your artistic taste and your ability to beautify the domestic sphere. It's one of those specific, time-bound crafts that historians love to rediscover, as it speaks volumes about the prescribed creative outlets for women of the era. While you are mastering these accomplishments, your moral education continues. You read from conduct books written specifically for young women, with titles like The Young Lady's Friend. These books advise you on how to be modest, pious, and submissive. They warn against the dangers of novels, which are believed to fill a young woman's head with romantic, unrealistic, and potentially immoral ideas. You are taught to cultivate an aura of innocence and to suppress any signs of intelligence or strong opinion that might be perceived as intimidating or unfeminine. The central contradiction of your education is a source of much debate among historians. You are being trained to be both accomplished and unassuming, knowledgeable but not opinionated, beautiful but modest. You must be interesting enough to attract a husband, but not so interesting that you overshadow him. This delicate balancing act was the great challenge for any well-educated Victorian girl. Some scholars argue that this system was profoundly oppressive, designed to create beautiful, docile ornaments. Others, however, have found evidence in letters and diaries that women used these accomplishments as genuine creative and intellectual outlets, finding private satisfaction and a sense of agency within the narrow confines of their roles. As you sit at the piano, your fingers moving across the keys, or bend over your embroidery frame, your needle flashing, you are acutely aware of the purpose of it all. You are not just learning to play a sonata or stitch a flower. You are crafting yourself. You are becoming the ideal of Victorian womanhood, a household angel, a beacon of culture, piety, and domestic tranquility. Your entire being is a carefully constructed work of art, designed for the appreciation of one very important future patron, your husband. At the age of 17 or 18, your formal education comes to an end. The governess is dismissed with a modest pension, the schoolroom is closed, and you prepare to graduate into the world. But your graduation ceremony is not held in a university hall. It is held in the glittering, ruthless arena of the London season. You are about to come out. This is the moment your entire life has been leading up to. Coming out is the formal process by which a young woman of the upper classes is officially introduced to society and declared eligible for marriage. It is a high-stakes, high-pressure, and astronomically expensive undertaking for your family. Your success or failure during your first season can determine the entire course of your life. The preparations are immense. A whole new wardrobe is commissioned, a dizzying array of ball gowns, afternoon dresses, carriage dresses, and riding habits. These are not the clothes of a girl, but of a woman. The necklines are lower, the fabrics are richer, and the styles are the absolute height of fashion. The season officially begins in late spring, after Easter, and runs until the glorious 12th of August, when society decamps to the countryside for the shooting season. For these few months, London is a whirlwind of social activity, a relentless marathon of parties, balls, dinners, and events. The first, most crucial step is your presentation at court. You are taken to Buckingham Palace to be formally presented to Queen Victoria herself. This is a terrifying ordeal. You have to wear a specific court dress with a long train and 3 white ostrich feathers in your hair. You are taught the court curtsy, a deep, complex, and graceful bow that you must perform without stumbling or losing your balance. Being presented at court is the official stamp of approval. It certifies that you and your family are of the appropriate social standing to participate in the season. Once you are out, your life becomes a carefully managed schedule of social engagements. Your mother is now your general, planning your campaign. Your days are filled with carriage rides in Hyde Park at the fashionable hour, afternoon calls to the homes of other society ladies, and attending events like the Royal Ascot horse races or the Henley Royal Regatta. The nights are for dancing. You attend several balls a week, sometimes more than one in a single evening. A ball is not just a party. It is the primary marketplace for marriage. You have a dance card, a small, decorative booklet where gentlemen who wish to dance with you can sign their names for a specific waltz or quadrille. Your goal is to have a full dance card. An empty card is a sign of social failure. A particularly charming, yet highly strategic, element of this world was the language of flowers, or floriography. While your governess might have taught you the basics, now it becomes a subtle to love communication. Different flowers held different meanings, and a small bouquet, or tasimasai, could convey a secret message. A potential suitor might send you a bouquet of red roses, love, and ivy, fidelity. You might wear a yellow carnation, disdain, to a ball to subtly ward off an unwanted admirer. Popular books published floral dictionaries to help young people navigate this silent, fragrant conversation. Whether these codes were as widely and precisely used as the book suggests is a matter of debate among historians, but they certainly captured the romantic imagination of the era. Behind the glittering facade, the season is a brutal competition. You are being judged constantly on your beauty, your dress, your manners, your accomplishments, and, most importantly, on your family's wealth and connections. Your mother is networking furiously, identifying suitable young men, arranging accidental meetings, and gathering intelligence on their prospects. A good match is not about love. It's about securing or improving your family's social and financial position. The ideal husband is an eldest son who will inherit a title and a great estate. The pressure is immense. You have to be charming but not forward, witty but not too clever, beautiful but modest. You must never appear bored or tired. You are performing from morning until night. If, by the end of your first or second season, you have not received a suitable proposal of marriage, you risk being labeled a failure and relegated to the sad ranks of spinsterhood. So you smile until your face aches. You make polite conversation about the weather. You waltz gracefully with a succession of young men whose names and faces blur together. You are a product being launched, a debutante in a sea of debutantes, all hoping to catch the eye of the right buyer. The fairy tale glamour of the London season is, in reality, a battlefield. Amid the whirlwind of balls and afternoon calls, a potential suitor emerges. He is deemed suitable by your parents. He has a respectable family, a decent income or prospects, and no glaring character flaws. A courtship begins. But if you are imagining stolen glances, secret meetings, and passionate love letters, you must think again. A Victorian courtship, particularly in the upper classes, is one of the most heavily chaperoned and formalized processes imaginable. You are never, ever to be alone with your suitor. Not for a moment. A chaperone is a constant, non-negotiable presence. This is usually your mother, but it could also be a married older sister, an aunt, or even a trusted governess or paid companion. The chaperone's job is to be a living, breathing barrier against any potential impropriety. She is the guardian of your reputation, which is your most valuable asset. A single moment of unchaperoned contact with a man could lead to ruinous gossip and destroy your marriage prospects entirely. So your dates take place in public or semi-public settings. He might be invited to join you and your mother for a walk in the park. He might be seated next to you at a family dinner, with dozens of other people around. He might call upon you at home in the afternoon, but he will be received in the formal drawing room, with your mother sitting discreetly in a corner, pretending to read or do her needlework, but listening to every word. The conversation is polite, formal, and utterly devoid of purse in all intimacy. You discuss the weather, a recent concert, a popular book. You are two people conducting a job interview in front of a supervisor. Even correspondence is monitored. While you might exchange letters, they are not filled with passionate declarations. They are formal, carefully composed documents. And it was not uncommon for a young lady's mother to read both the incoming and outgoing mail to ensure the tone remained appropriate. This strict surveillance led to the development of ingenious, if slightly absurd, workarounds. The language of the fan, which you learned as a girl, could now be deployed in earnest. A flutter of the fan in a certain way could signal encouragement. Holding it to your lips could mean, "I wish to speak with you." It was a silent, coded flirtation conducted in plain sight. Another popular tool was the acrostic. A suitor might write a seemingly innocent poem where the first letter of each line spelled out a hidden, more affectionate message. These small acts of subterfuge were a way of carving out a tiny space for personal connection in a highly repressive system. One of the most peculiar and debated aspects of Victorian courtship is the engagement ring. While the tradition of giving a ring is ancient, the Victorians infused it with their own unique symbolism. Instead of a simple diamond, it was fashionable for the man to give a regard ring. This was a ring set with a specific sequence of stones: a ruby, an emerald, a garnet, an amethyst, another ruby, and a diamond. The first letter of each gemstone spelled out the word regard. Another popular variation was a deer string: diamond, emerald, amethyst, ruby, emerald, sapphire, topaz. It was a clever, sentimental puzzle, a way of expressing affection through a coded object. The proposal of marriage itself is the one moment that, ideally, is supposed to be private. After receiving permission from your father to pay his addresses to you, the suitor would be granted a brief, chaperoned from a distant audience. He would make his formal proposal. Your answer, however, is not entirely your own. You have been raised to understand that a good match is your duty. While the ideal was to marry for love, love was expected to follow, or at least coincide with, a sensible, fair and approved choice. To refuse a good offer without a very compelling reason would be seen as foolish and ungrateful. Historians have long debated the emotional reality of these courtships. Were they really as sterile and transactional as they appear? The formal rules certainly suggest so. But human nature is resilient. Diaries and letters from the period reveal that deep and genuine love couldn't blossom within these restrictive confines. A shared glance across a ballroom, a brief touch of hands while passing a teacup, the hidden meaning in a bouquet of flowers. These small moments could carry immense emotional weight. The very obstacles in the way of intimacy might have made the feelings, when they did develop, even more intense. But for now, you are playing your part in the formal drama. You are polite, modest, and appropriately distant. You are being courted not as an individual, but as a representative of your family. The man courting you is doing the same. It is a negotiation between two dynasties, and you and he are the very charming, very well-behaved ambassadors. The wedding is a grand affair, the triumphant culmination of your entire upbringing. You are married in a flurry of white satin, or hinge blossoms, and social expectation. After a brief, parent-approved honeymoon, you return to begin your new life as the mistress of a household. And in this new role, your relationship with your parents undergoes its final, subtle transformation. You are no longer their child. You are their peer. Your interactions with them, which have been formal for years, now settle into a pattern of polite, almost business-like, social calls. You visit your mother on her designated at-home day. She, in turn, visits you. These are not spontaneous drop-ins. They are scheduled appointments in the social calendar. You take tea together in the drawing room, the same room where you were once presented as a well-behaved child. The conversation is a masterpiece of decorum. You inquire after your father's health. Your mother asks about your new household, your servants, and your husband's work. You might discuss the latest society news, a recent concert, or the upcoming christening of a mutual acquaintance's baby. What you do not discuss are your fears, your disappointments, your frustrations with your new life, or any marital difficulties you might be having. Such topics are considered deeply inappropriate. Emotional intimacy is not part of the script. The stiff upper lip you were taught to cultivate in the nursery is now your default setting. You might have lunch or dinner with your parents, but these are formal occasions, often including your husband and other guests. The family meal is not a time for relaxed bonding, but a continuation of the social performances you have been trained for. The seating is arranged according to precedence. The conversation is general and polite, and the strict rules of table etiquette are observed as always. Your relationship with your father, in particular, may become even more distant. He now relates to you primarily through your husband. They might discuss politics or business, worlds from which you are excluded. He sees you as settled, your future secure. His duty is done. He might treat you with a kind of benevolent, paternal affection, but the connection is formal, mediated by your new status as Mrs. Husband's name, This formal distance is perhaps one of the most lasting and poignant legacies of your Victorian upbringing. The system was not designed to foster close, communicative, modern-style family relationships. It was designed to produce adults who knew their roles and performed them flawlessly. Emotional expression was a private matter, not to be aired, even with those closest to you. A curious, untelling detail of this adult relationship can be found in the language of letters. Even in correspondence with their own parents, adult children often maintained a remarkably formal tone. A letter to your father might begin, "My dearest Papa," but the content would be largely news-based and observational, ending with a formal closing like, "I remain, your ever-affectionate daughter." The expression of deep, personal feeling was rare and often veiled in conventional phrases. Historians poring over these family archives are often struck by this emotional restraint, debating whether it reflects a genuine lack of intimacy or simply a different, more codified way of expressing affection that is difficult for us to interpret today. Some scholars argue that this emotional gulf was a source of profound, unaccompanied loneliness for many Victorians. They had been trained so thoroughly to suppress their feelings that they were unable to form truly intimate bonds, even with their own parents or children. This, some suggest, contributed to the famous Victorian melancholy and the prevalence of nervous disorders, particularly among women, who had few other outlets for their frustrations. So you navigate this new, polite relationship with the two people who raised you. You love them, of course, but it is a quiet, respectful love, expressed through the faithful execution of social duties. You send them a gift at Christmas. You remember their birthdays. You visit when you are expected to. The messy, emotional, vulnerable parts of yourself, which were suppressed in the nursery, remained hidden. The goal of your upbringing was to make you a successful adult, not a connected one. And by all external measures, you have succeeded. You are a wife, a hostess, a pillar of society. But in the quiet moments, in the formal drawing room making polite conversation with your own mother, you might feel the vast, silent space that your training has placed between you. You are now a fully fledged adult, a product of the most rigorous and demanding child-rearing system. You have a husband, a home, and perhaps children of your own who are just beginning their own journey through the nursery. As you look around at your peers, your siblings, and even yourself in the mirror, you can see the indelible mark of your upbringing. You are one of a generation of timid, respectable people, and you are all bound by a shared, unspoken emotional code. The most obvious legacy is the famous stiff upper lip. You have been trained since infancy not to cry, not to complain, not to show excessive emotion of any kind. This is not just a personal quirk. It is a collective trait. In the face of personal tragedy, the death of a loved one, financial ruin, the expectation is that you will carry on with quiet fortitude. Public displays of grief are considered unseemly, a loss of control. Joy, too, is moderated. You might feel immense happiness, but you express it with a gentle smile, not with exuberant laughter. Your emotional life is a private, internal landscape, and the face you present to the world is one of calm, placid composure. This emotional restraint creates a visible and often unbridgeable gulf between people. You may have known your husband for years, but there are vast areas of his inner life that are completely unknown to you, and yours to him. Conversation focuses on the practical, the social, and the intellectual, but rarely strays into the vulnerable territory of feelings. This is not necessarily seen as a failure of the relationship. It is simply the way things are. Intimacy is expressed through shared duty, mutual respect, and the smooth running of the household, not through deep, soul-bearing conversations. This emotional distance is particularly poignant when you have your own children. You love them deeply, but you may find yourself replicating the very patterns you grew up with. You hire a nanny. You visit the nursery for a scheduled period each day. You feel a pang of something, guilt, Confusion. When you kiss your child's forehead and it feels more like a formal duty than a spontaneous act of affection. You instruct the nanny to be firm, to instill discipline, because that is how one raises a good child. You're passing down the emotional blueprint you inherited. A fascinating and somewhat sad manifestation of this emotional repression was the Victorian obsession with the secret. Novels of the era are filled with characters harboring dark secrets. An illegitimate child, a hidden crime, a secret illness. This literary trope resonated so strongly because it mirrored a psychological reality. When genuine feelings cannot be expressed, they fester and become secrets. Every family, it seemed, had its unspoken truths, its carefully guarded closets full of skeletons. The smooth, respectable surface of society was maintained by a collective agreement, not to speak of the messy realities that lay beneath. Historians and psychologists have long debated the long-term consequences of this upbringing. Some argue that it created a generation of highly disciplined, resilient, and public-spirited individuals who were capable of running an empire precisely because they were not encumbered by personal feelings. Their sense of duty was stronger than their desire for individual happiness. However, a more critical view suggests that this emotional stunting led to a host of psychological problems. The hysteria diagnosed so frequently in women was, many scholars now believe, a manifestation of suppressed rage, frustration, and desire in a life with no acceptable outlets for such feelings. For men, the inability to express vulnerability or fear could lead to depression, alcoholism, or a harsh, unforgiving attitude towards themselves and others. The internal pressure of maintaining the facade of perfect respectability was immense. You feel this pressure every day. It is in the careful choice of your words during a social call. It is in the way you hold back a sharp retort to your husband. It is in the quiet sigh you exhale only when you are completely alone. You are a successful product of your time, perfectly adapted to your social environment. But there is a part of you, a spontaneous, passionate, and perhaps more authentic self, that was systematically trained into silence. That self is the ghost in the machine of your respectable life. A quiet but persistent reminder of the emotional cost of your perfect Victorian childhood. You are seen, but you have never been truly, fully heard. As you stand in your drawing room, watching your own children play their structured, educational games, a strange question might float into your mind. Did you have a childhood? The answer, according to the emerging ideas of your own time, is complicated. The very concept of childhood as we understand it today, a distinct, protected phase of life dedicated to play, innocence, and emotional development, was, in many ways, a Victorian invention, but one that you may have only partially experienced. For centuries, children were largely seen as miniature adults. As soon as they were physically able, they were expected to contribute to the family's work, whether on a farm or in a workshop. They were integrated into the adult world, with all its hardships and responsibilities, from a very young age. The idea that they had unique developmental needs was not widely considered. The Victorian era, particularly the middle and upper classes, changed that. For the first time, a clear line was drawn between the world of the adult and the world of the child. The nursery and the schoolroom became protected spaces, sealed off from the harsh realities of the adult world of work and politics. This separation was a radical new idea. It created a space for childhood to exist. You are a beneficiary of this new idea. You did not have to work in a factory or a mine. You were sheltered, educated, and provided for. Your days were not filled with labor, but with lessons, structured play, and moral instruction. In this sense, you absolutely had a childhood, one that would have been an unimaginable luxury for the vast majority of children throughout history. However, the childhood that was constructed for you was not one of freedom and self-discovery. It was a period of intense training on molding. It was a preparatory stage, an apprenticeship for adulthood. Every activity, as you well know, had a purpose. Your play was educational. Your education was for social advancement. Your clothing was for discipline. Your food was for moral fortitude. You were not allowed to simply be a child. You were required to perform childhood according to a very strict script. A fascinating and slightly strange phenomenon of the era highlights this performative aspect: the obsession with photographing dead children. In an age of high infant mortality, post-mortem photography was a common way for grieving parents to have a final memento of their lost child. These photographs are deeply unsettling to the modern eye. The deceased child is often posed as if sleeping, sometimes with their favorite toys or with their living siblings. While it seems morbid to us, for the Victorians it was a way of capturing the idealized image of the innocent, sleeping child, preserving them in a state of perfect, peaceful childhood forever. It speaks volumes about their idealization of childhood as a state of passive innocence, an ideal that was often imposed upon the living as well. The historical debate around the invention of childhood is a cornerstone of family history. Did the Victorians discover childhood, or did they invent it in a way that served their own social and moral agendas? Many historians argue that while they championed the idea of a protected childhood, the reality they created was often just as restrictive, in its own way, as the life of a laboring child. One was a life of physical hardship, the other a life of psychological constraint. Towards the end of the century, new ideas began to challenge this rigid model. Thinkers like Friedrich F. Roebel, the inventor of the kindergarten, began to champion the importance of free, creative play. A new, more sentimental view of childhood began to emerge, one that celebrated the innocence and natural goodness of children, rather than seeing them as little sinners whose wills needed to be broken. Books like Alice's Adventures in Wonderland presented a world of joyful, chaotic, and nonsensical imagination, a stark contrast to the moralizing tales you grew up with. But you were raised on the earlier side of this shift. Your childhood was a paradox. You were elevated unprotected, placed in a special category that had never existed before. Yet that special category was a gilded cage. You were given the gift of time, but not the gift of freedom. You had a childhood, but it was a childhood that belonged more to your parents' ambitions and anxieties than it did to you. It was a period of life that was defined not by what it was, but by what it was meant to produce. A perfect, respectable, Victorian adult. Even in the most rigid of systems, cracks begin to appear. The world you were so carefully trained for is not static. Throughout your life, you've seen the subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, signs of change. The monolithic structure of Victorian child rearing, which seemed so absolute in your youth, is starting to be questioned, dismantled, and reimagined. The seeds of rebellion, or at least reform, are taking root. You see it in the new generation of children, perhaps even your own grandchildren. Their nurseries seem brighter, with more pictures on the walls. Their toys include soft, cuddly teddy bears, a new invention named after the American president, Theodore Roosevelt, designed for comfort rather than moral instruction. The sailor suits and restrictive dresses are gradually being replaced by more comfortable, practical clothing that allows for actual, physical play. The theories of education are changing too. The relentless focus on rote memorization is giving way to new ideas about fostering curiosity and creativity. The kindergarten movement, with its emphasis on play-based learning, songs, and nature, is gaining popularity. The idea that a child's happiness might be a valid educational goal in itself is a revolutionary concept, one that would have been dismissed as frivolous and dangerous in your own schoolroom. Parenting advice itself is evolving. New magazines and books for parents are emerging, and their tone is different. While still concerned with discipline and health, they speak more of affection, understanding, and the importance of the mother's direct involvement. The distant, managerial style of parenting that you experienced is slowly being reframed as cold and unnatural. The idea that a mother should be the primary source of love and comfort for her child is gaining traction, challenging the reign of the nanny. One of the most curious and telling signs of this shift can be seen in the changing attitudes towards Santa Claus, or Father Christmas. In the early Victorian period, he was often a more formidable figure, a stern judge who rewarded the good and punished the bad, sometimes depicted carrying a birch rod along with his gifts. By the end of the century, influenced by Clement Clarke Moore's poem, was The Night Before Christmas and Thomas Nast's jolly illustrations, he has transformed into the benevolent, grandfatherly figure we know today. This softening of Santa Claus mirrors the broader cultural shift towards a gentler, more sentimental view of childhood. Historians see this evolution as a fascinating barometer of changing social attitudes. Of course, not everyone embraces these changes. You hear your contemporaries lamenting the softness of the new generation. They complain that children are becoming unruly, disrespectful, and coddle. They worry that these new methods will fail to produce the strong, disciplined character necessary to lead society. This tension between the old way and the new way is a frequent topic of conversation at afternoon tea. The historical debate over this transition is rich and ongoing. Was this a true revolution in thought, or just a superficial change in style? Some historians argue that the fundamental goal, producing compliant, class-appropriate citizens, remained the same, just with a gentler, more psychologically sophisticated toolkit. Others see it as a genuinely profound shift, driven by a complex mix of forces, new psychological theories, a rising middle class with different values, and a romantic reaction against the perceived coldness and rigidity of the high Victorian era. You find yourself caught between these two worlds. Part of you recognizes the harshness of your own upbringing and feels a sense of relief that things are changing for your grandchildren. You see them laugh more freely, speak their minds more openly, and you feel a pang of something like envy. But another part of you, the part that was so thoroughly conditioned, feels a sense of unease. Is all this freedom wise? Is all this emotion healthy? The rules you lived by provided a sense of certainty and order. This new world of feeling and freedom seems chaotic and unpredictable. The rebellion is not loud or violent. It's a quiet, gradual blooming. It is the sound of more laughter in the nursery, the sight of a mother cuddling her own baby, the publication of a children's book that is meant only to delight, not to instruct. The world that shaped you is fading, and a new one is being born, one that will one day look back on your childhood with a mixture of fascination, pity, and disbelief. The gas lights on your street have been replaced by the steady, clean glow of electric lamps. The sound of horses' hooves is now often mixed with the chugging and rattling of the occasional motor car. The world of your youth, the world of Queen Victoria, of rigid certainties and unshakable hierarchies, is receding into memory, becoming a sepia-toned photograph. You are now an elder, a living relic from another time, and as you reflect on the long arc of your life, you are essentially looking back at the life cycle of a grand and flawed parenting experiment. Your journey began in a dimly lit room, handed over from doctor to monthly nurse. Your first human contact defined by professional duty rather than parental love. You were managed by a nanny in a remote nursery. Your cries quieted with discipline and perhaps a dose of laudanum-laced syrup. Your nourishment came from a stranger, a wet nurse whose own child was sacrificed for your well-being. You were a genderless creature in a white gown, your emotions carefully policed to prevent the bad habit of crying. Then came the schoolroom, the governess, and the endless rules of etiquette. Your mind was filled with memorized facts and your body was straightened by backboards. Your playtime was a lesson, your toys were teachers, and your meals were an exercise in bland self-denial. You were squeezed into the uncomfortable uniforms of your gender, the sailor suit for your brother, the corseted dress for you, costumes for the roles you were destined to play. Sickness was a terrifying battle fought with mercury and mustard poultices, and God was a constant, watchful eye, tallying your sins. Your friendships were strategic alliances. Your brother was sent away to be hardened in the Spartan cruelty of boarding school, while you were polished into a marriageable commodity through the accomplishments. You came out into the glittering, ruthless marriage market of the London season, a debutante on display. Your courtship was a chaperone negotiation, your marriage a strategic merger. And the result of it all, you became a pillar of society. You learned to maintain a stiff upper lip, to keep your true feelings hidden behind a facade of polite composure. You built a life upon a foundation of duty, discipline, and emotional restraint. You inhabited a world where the concept of childhood was both newly precious and intensely controlled, a gilded cage of preparation. One of the last, lingering oddities from that past is the collection of sentimental jewelry you might still keep in a velvet-lined box. A locket containing a tightly woven curl of your mother's hair. A brooch made from the polished baby teeth of your first-born child. It seems morbid to your grandchildren, but to you, it's perfectly normal. In a world where emotional expression was so restricted, feelings were channeled into these strange, tangible objects. A lock of hair was a physical piece of a loved one you could keep forever, a tangible connection in a world of emotional distance. Historians now study this hair-work jewelry as a poignant testament to the Victorians' desperate need for sentimental outlets, a way to express all that they could not always speak aloud. Looking back, you see the whole system laid bare. It was a parenting philosophy born of a unique set of circumstances, a rigid class structure, a fervent religious morality, a burgeoning empire that needed administrators, and a pre-scientific anxiety about health and hygiene. It was designed to produce a specific type of person, for a specific type of world. And now, that world is gone. You are a memory, a story. The tale of your upbringing is no longer a parenting manual, but a historical curiosity. It is a lesson in how profoundly a society's values can shape the most intimate corners of human life, and a quiet testament to the enduring and ever-changing question of what it means to be a child. And so, the story comes to a gentle close. The echoes of the schoolroom bell have faded. The rustle of the starched apron has gone silent. The world we just visited, with all its rigid rules and quiet anxieties, begins to dissolve, like sugar in warm tea. Feel the weight of those corsets and collars just release. Let go of the need to sit up straight, to keep that stiff upper lip. There are no more lessons to memorize, no more etiquette to perform. The journey is over. You can feel yourself drifting now, floating away from the gas-lit streets of Victorian London, back into the soft, quiet comfort of your own bed. The steady, rhythmic hum of the fan is like a gentle tide, washing away the details, leaving only a dream-like impression of rustling silk and whispered rules. The character you've been, the life you've lived, now feels very, very far away. It's just a story that was told, a path that was walked in another time. All that matters now is the gentle rhythm of your own breathing. In and out. Pace slow, easy carrying you further and further into stillness. The boundary between the story and your own dreams begins to blur. And that's perfectly all right. Let them mingle. Let the images soften and warm, becoming part of your own unique, peaceful landscape. There is nothing else you need to do, nothing you need to think about. Just rest. Just be. The night is deep and quiet, and you are safe and sound, drifting peacefully toward the morning light.